around the time I was in university the last year or two, I sort of figured out a lot of things about American history that's sort of hidden from us. The government isn't exactly there to help necessarily.
I don't know how we went from, hey, government is like fire, with George Washington saying, if you're in control of it, it's good. If it's out of control, it'll burn you, to, hey, we're from the government. We'll educate your kids. How could you possibly think a government is going to raise kids who say, be skeptical of us?
Yeah, well, it's not, look at who has taken over our education system. You go back to things like the Rockefeller family or their role in healthcare. There's a lot of oligarch families that have very specific agendas that have really taken over government policy, and it's been like that for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And they're not elected. No one put them in charge. Actually, a lot of people used to hate the Rockefeller family until, they started a major PR campaign to rebrand themselves as philanthropists that a lot of other unpleasant people have since followed. The long-term consequences of that we are seeing today. But anyway, in terms of my background, I was, 21, 22, and just looking around, I'm 33, so I'm a millennial, right? And most people my age just, I could see a lot of this stuff, like we're too dependent on corporations that have a lot of nasty agendas or do bad things. There's a lot of issues, a lot of illegal wars, no accountability at the highest levels of government. If people my age don't start doing something, it's going to get really bad. And most people were like, stop talking about that. I have Netflix and beer, so I don't care. Everything's fine as long as, I'm comfortable, basically. Screw your politics or screw your concerns. And I just,
then wait,
I left the U.S. after that.
How can these same group of people, that generation, claim that no, you have to be an activist. You have to be involved in climate change. And, I'm going to sit down and glue myself to a wall like a moron.
Yeah, well, that's the activism that's put in front of young people today, and they're being told that's what activism is, and that's the activism that's sort of in vogue because it's shown and treated by mainstream media as sticking it to the man. Right. These people throwing tomato soup on paintings, but you look at those groups, I think they're called Just Stop Oil. They're funded by the Getty and Rockefeller families, and the Rockefeller family, made their money off of oil, but they have a long time interest in eugenics and funding.
Correct.
People that basically helped create this sort of new environmental movement that downplays pollution and plays up carbon dioxide, and that's all we should be worried about. And, it's the biggest, I think the quote from the Club of Rome is the biggest enemy of humanity is man, and furthering, that narrative, not that, it's not the corporations that pollute or even the U.S. military is even by, climate change metrics, the biggest contaminator of, the planet and all of that. It's not about those guys. It's just about the regular people. But really what it's about is controlling how much energy people can use. And if you control how much energy a household can use, you can control their economic activity. You also control how big their family can get. And I think that's ultimately what it's about. It's not about the environment for these people. And a lot of it is, Wall Street driven. You look at the United Nations, a lot of the people they put in charge of climate change policy. You have Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England and the Bank of Canada, I believe. He's one of the guys that came in to rescue HSBC when they were caught money laundering for Mexican drug cartels. Not exactly a good guy. And it's very unlikely that he is driven by concern about the environment. And then the other person is Michael Bloomberg, former mayor of New York and billionaire guy. And so these are the people crafting the solutions. And just like COVID, you don't have time to think about what we're telling you. You just have to accept these solutions, because if you don't, something really, really bad will happen. And it's sort of a similar narrative to what, was played out with COVID and
everything, guns, cars, everything.
Yeah. So, people are being, it's fear driven to get people to accept policies they otherwise wouldn't accept because they're told this cataclysmic event is just down the line. And trust us, again, is the conclusion of that. So, there's people that agree with the narrative about climate change, and there's people that don't. And I'm not trying to really get in that space when I talk about this stuff. I'm trying to point out that the solutions are coming mostly from Wall Street, and they're things like carbon markets. They're things like debt for climate swaps, which back in the day used to be debt for land swaps, not about climate change, about other stuff. And then you have people like Larry Fink of BlackRock and Michael Bloomberg and Mark Carney coming together in something like GFAN saying, why don't we give Wall Street direct control of the IMF and the World Bank for climate change?
Right.
How can anyone on the left that's worried about climate change sign off on that? Why don't they talk about planting trees? Why isn't Bill Gates the largest private landowner in the U.S. now planting trees like crazy if he's so worried about carbon dioxide? He poo-poos the whole idea of planting trees as a way to combat climate change. It's just carbon markets and going to electric vehicles and all of this stuff. But electric vehicles necessitates mass mining. And a lot of that mining is in places that use child labor, or it's going to be so environmentally destructive you totally destroy the developing world, which, these people on the left supposedly want to protect. You're going to totally destroy the environment. I live in the south of Chile in the Andes. It's one of the only areas in Chile that's still forested and really nice, not polluted water, any of that. Most of the mining in Chile is historically in the north, which has become very polluted and has a lack of water, among other things. And now the mines are starting to move south because of this demand for more and more minerals for, electric vehicles and all of that. A lake that used to be used for tourism, there was some mineral, I forget what it is, discovered in the lake shore, and then the water just disappears one season, and now it's ready to be mining right next to a national park. I used to live and work in Peru. They were talking about putting a uranium mine next to Machu Picchu and all types of stuff. I mean, this is the mining stuff is not being talked about, and, electrical vehicles are being marketed as necessary. But it's going to come at a massive, massive cost. And I think that, again, the environmental movement is focused on carbon dioxide. If they were really worried about the environment, they would also educate people on how destructive this type of mining is and what it does to the people who live there and the environment, and including in protected areas. There's a lot of species in this particular area of Chile where I live that are only there, and they've been there for thousands of years, and they'll not exist if a lot of this mining goes forward. But if you ask people like Bill Gates, for example, who has a joint venture with most of the other titans of Silicon Valley called Cobalt Metals, they say all of the world's reserves of lithium, cobalt, and nickel must be completely mined if we even want to get close to the electrical vehicle revolution. So that means digging up the entire Andes, including areas that are national parks right now. And even if they do, with all the reserves that we know that we have, you're not going to be able to reproduce the amount of private cars in use today. It's going to be way less cars. And so they're just going to be, the model's already sort of been out there. They fielded it in the UK recently. You can't drive out of your district and all of that stuff. It's going to be much more controlled, the freedom of movement. Well, it's not really going to be freedom of movement. It's going to be controlled movement.